Imagine receiving a sealed message from the imperial palace, a summons from the Empress herself. You are a high-born Roman woman. Your family commands respect. Your marriage secures alliances. Your reputation is everything. You expect a ceremony, a festival, a cultured discourse. But when you arrive, the atmosphere changes. Guards flank you. Other noblewomen are gathered in silence. The Empress appears and proclaims, "You are here to compete." Publicly, under the scrutiny of the court, your virtue, your body, your reputation on display. This is no myth. Something like this could have happened, or at least it resonates with darker themes in Roman power. In today's video, we explore a dramatic, haunting story of control, shame, and resistance behind closed doors, and reflect on what it tells us about power and abuse both then and now. Stay with me, you're about to step into the shadows of empire. Let's start by zooming out. Rome in the 2nd–3rd centuries CE was a world of sharp hierarchy. Senators, equestrians, the imperial court, and the vast masses beyond. Court life revolved not just around military or political power, but spectacle, reputation, and image. To belong to the elite was to live constantly under public eyes, where rumors, gossip, and scandal could shatter status overnight. In this environment, power, especially imperial power, often subsisted on fear, spectacle, and signaling. The public games, triumphs, and displays served as overt reminders of authority. But what if an empress decided to take that spectacle inward, into the most intimate domain of women's bodies and reputations? The original narration posits Empress Julia Soia Spasiana, mother of Emperor Elgabalus, here called Elgabalus in the original, as having engineered a system that forced noblewomen into public sexual competitions. These hypothetical contests would become instruments of absolute control, humiliation, incentives, rewards, and blackmail. I want to emphasize, no known historian confirms exactly this system. What we do have are scattered testimonies of sexual abuse, coercion, and humiliation in imperial settings. Stories of power wielded over women, of shame weaponized, of voices silenced. These form the deeper soil from which a narrative like this is born. Let's unpack how such a system might operate, combining the original's dramatic claims with critical thought and historical parallels. Imperial summons. The original claims the summons came disguised as an invitation, a symposium on feminine virtue or devotion. In elite Roman culture, public virtue, virtues for men, pudicitia for women, was often invoked in moralistic or rhetorical discourse. A summons in the name of piety or devotion could mask a deeper coercive demand. Private amphitheatres and performance noblewomen would be escorted into a concealed performance space. Other participants wait in confusion, tension rising. The Empress, flanked by guards and officials, would announce that they are to display devotion, implicitly sexual acts, judged under the imperial gaze, judging rankings, and incentives. This was no chaotic scene. According to the original, women were recorded, ranked, rewarded, or punished. Incentive structures, tax breaks, political favor, trade concessions would reward compliance. Penalties, exile, financial sanctions, social ruin await dissenters, blackmail, and data collection. Perhaps the most chilling claim, dossiers compiled on all participants, which women resisted, which acquiesced, who crossed which lines. This data would become political currency, used to enforce loyalty, silence dissent, or manipulate alliances. Is this system entirely plausible? While the specifics are fictional, the core dynamics reflect themes we see in real Roman sources: sexualized control, reputational damage, imperial coercion, and the weaponization of shame. In fact, scholars note that Roman elite women were vulnerable to slander, forced prostitution, and moral accusations. On violence and coercive control, see domestic violence and vulnerability in the Roman world. To deepen this, I want to anchor the narrative with real historical parallels, not to claim the fictional system existed intact, but to show how the mechanisms echo lived experiences. Case: Vistilia, 1st century CE. Vistilia, a woman of senatorial descent, officially registered herself as a prostitute, not because she led a life of public sex work, but as a legal strategy. Under Roman law, a registered prostitute was exempt from certain charges of adultery. Tacitus records that the Senate later passed a law restricting women of equestrian or senatorial class from such registration. The paradox is stark. She used a sexual designation to protect her honor, but the very fact she was tried and shamed shows how vulnerable enfranchised women were to moral accusation. Legal and social violence against women. Roman women frequently faced coercive control in marriage, property disputes, and reputation. Studies of papyri and epigraphic evidence reveal stories of forced abduction, ongoing abuse, humiliation, and property seizure. While not identical to forced competitions, these documented forms of power over women's bodies and social standing serve as real analogues to the fictional mechanism. A hypothetical example of resistance. Suppose a noblewoman named Claudia Leia is summoned. She refuses. In retaliation, the Empress cancels her husband's promotion, cuts off trade ties, blocks grain supply. After weeks of starvation and political pressure, Claudia capitulates, performing in the spectacle, all while recording her shame and fear internally. The court then holds her up as a model, both victim and enforcer. That hypothetical mirrors the original's case of Claudia C. and illustrates how coercion, social pressure, and limited options intertwine. Resistance and collapse. In the original, a senator, Marcus Aurelius Seius, attempts protest, vanishes. The Empress's system pushes allied kingdoms to pull back, demanding dignity for their women. After all, what royal house would risk their daughters becoming spectacle? Historically, imperial power did fracture over scandal and overreach. Emperors were deposed, assassinated, or forced into exile when their scandals threatened alliances or stability. While there's no historical record of an empress destroying entire diplomatic networks over sexual spectacle, the pattern, overreach, backlash, collapse, is common in Roman imperial history. At this point you might think, wait, the system is likely fabricated or exaggerated. Is there any value in this myth? That's exactly what I want to explore. Myth as lens, not literal fact. This narrative is more useful as a speculative lens, combining known themes of sex, power, shame, and control, rather than a strictly factual claim. It synthesizes scattered historical realities, abuse, scandal, coercion, in a dramatic frame to make us ask, how far could imperial power reach into private lives? 2. Thematic power structures. What makes this story compelling is not the literal veracity, but the mechanisms it dramatizes. Normalization of abuse via bureaucratic ritual shame, reputation and blackmail as levers of control, victims forced into complicity and then used as enforcers, the fragility of elite status when reputation is weaponized. These are not alien to history or even our own era. Mirror to modern abuses in the original. The narrator draws parallels to modern predation, grooming, exploitation, coercion, manipulation through shame or blackmail, and institutional normalization of abuse. When we abstract those mechanisms, we see deeper patterns. Those in power creating systems that normalize harm, then counting on silence, scapegoating victims, and controlling narratives. By retelling such a story, we push viewers to see beyond sensationalism, to the structural logic, how power becomes toxicity. Let's dramatize, again, fictional but plausible, how such a regime might unravel. Overreach. The Empress pushes too far, demanding foreign royal women attend or be shamed. Allied kingdoms balk, diplomatic relationships shatter, marriages fall through. Internal resistance. Some of the very women who were forced participants begin coordinating resistance, using the secrecy of court whispers, forging alliances, leaking documents. Elite coup, senators, disaffected guards and exiled elites join. A palace coup is staged. On a fateful day, the Empress and the Emperor are assassinated. The system collapses overnight. The spectacle ends. In our narrative, this happens in March 2020 CE, an obvious anachronism in the original, likely intended as March 222 CE. The fictional reign of terror is purged, but the scars and memories linger. Let me pull you out of the drama for a moment. What grips me most is the fate of the nameless victims. Hundreds of noblewomen whose names were never recorded, whose stories obliterated. They represent not just fictional characters, but the countless real women across history, those erased by power, whose suffering was overshadowed by headlines, monuments, or imperial stories. Consider how reputation has functioned historically as property, honor, shame, virtue. These are social currencies, especially for women in patriarchal societies. Once someone can control your reputation, they control your survival. Also, victims becoming enforcers. A woman coerced into compliance might later participate in silencing others, lest her own secrets be revealed. This is the tragedy of complicity in oppressive systems. Finally, resilience. Even in the darkest myths, resistance flickers. In whispers, in courage, in the decision to speak out. Though the fictional Empress crushes dissent, the narrative contains the seeds of revolt. So here's our ending, and the key takeaway for you, the viewer. Lesson 1. Spectacle can be the dirtiest tool of power. When abuse is ritualized, normalized, and bureaucratized, it becomes invisible to many, even as it devastates lives. Lesson 2. Shame and reputation are battlegrounds. The control of narrative, who is labeled, who is silenced, is as lethal as physical force. Lesson 3. Resistance is always possible, but it requires solidarity. When the oppressed become the enforcers, the power structure becomes self-perpetuating. Breaking that cycle means reclaiming voice, refusing complicity, and refusing the silence. Lesson 4. Myth can teach deeper truths. This story is not so much an assertion of fact as a dramatized lens. It magnifies patterns across time, sexual abuse by power, institutional normalization of harm, and the fragility of status when ethics crumble. If you've watched this far, I hope you see more than drama, you see systems. I invite you to look at both ancient tales and present-day scandals through this lens. Which abuses are hidden in routine? Which reputations have been weaponized? Which voices have been silenced? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Which historical or modern example reminds you of this story? Let's build a conversation grounded in justice, remembrance, and vigilance. Outro cue. If this exploration resonated, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to dive deeper into stories that power often buries. Until next time, keep asking, keep listening, keep pushing beyond spectacle to truth.